Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Dear Mr. Fantasy here on the Player Profiler Network. Today, I have a very special guest with me. You may have noticed sitting next to me in the wrong spot. Let's go ahead and switch that up. Let's get the right name under there for you, Phil. Mr. Phil Yates from ESPN. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. For a second, Nate, I thought that we had switched aliases there. I'd be okay with it. I love my name, but if we wanted to switch it up for half an hour, that's fine.
See, I love your name too. It's so unique, and my last name's too hard to say, right? Yates would be so much easier for me to explain to people.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the origin of your last name? What kind of heritage do you have?
Prussian. It's a
Prussian.
Okay. Yeah. Ancient Prussian. Yeah.
So what's the most common pronunciation that people utilize when they say your name out loud, having never heard it before?
Polvogt.
Polvogt. Okay.
Yeah, it's technically supposed to be pronounced Polvogt, but that's a little too on the nose for me. So I just stick with the American Polvogt.
Phonetic. Okay.
Too phonetic. That's right. Well, Phil,
yeah.
Let's get into some of these questions here. We've got some excited viewers ready for you to kind of help them with their fantasy woes. And our first question comes from my friend Jamie. I just traded Tony Pollard for Nick Chubb on a championship team looking to repeat this year. I'm set at running back with Brees, Etienne, Swift, Pearson, Chubb. Did he make the right move, Phil?
I think it's an okay move. Here's what I would say is people may not like this, but I'm a big believer in the fantasy world of not necessarily ranking players 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I call it tiering, you call it clustering, you call it grouping, whatever you want to call players. I think that Nick Chubb and Tony Pollard, and this is we're having this conversation Thursday, March 23rd, noon on the East Coast. As of how things stand right now, both of them have an obvious pathway to a top 10 running back season. For Nick Chubb, the fact that Kareem Hunt, at least to this point, has not been re-signed, opens up the possibility of a bit more passing game utilization. Why does that matter? Because, of course, Nick Chubb's ceiling has always been limited by the fact that he is an incredible runner who hardly gets targets. Meanwhile, as for Tony Pollard, while Ronald Jones was recently added on a one-year deal, he's a fine player, but he could barely get off the bench last year in Kansas City, suggesting this is Tony Pollard's job unto himself. Tony Pollard has been a more dynamic receiver than Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has proven that he can handle a larger workload than Tony Pollard as a runner. So while I think this move is a totally serviceable one, I would say that it's one that both sides can easily talk themselves into this helped me as opposed to this helped the other person, which is not always the case in fantasy football.
Yeah, and you make a good point about there might be some PPR upside to Chubb now, which is interesting. And I'm someone who has him rostered in a lot of leagues, and please, God, let them start throwing the ball to him more. That would just be absolutely phenomenal news. So now we're going to move on to our next question, Field, and this is kind of in that Cleveland wheelhouse again. What do you think Elijah Moore's fantasy ceiling is with the trade to Cleveland?
I think it's like a top 30-ish wide receiver. And here are the reasons why. So first of all, I think you have to be wary of calling too many guys potential top 10 wide receivers, right? That he devalues them. Hey, this guy's got top 10 wide receiver upside. I mean, so I always, and we're in the real draft season more so than we are in the fantasy draft season. But, I hear like 100 guys that are labeled as a potential first-round player. And I'm like, there's 31 first-round picks this year, because Miami forfeited theirs. Not going to be 100 guys that go in the first round. There'll be 31. And of those players that don't go in the first round, like legitimately maybe a handful are players that teams with picks 28, 29, 30 are considering, if not the player they end up selecting. So I think top 30-ish wide receiver upside for Elijah Moore would be if a couple of things go right. First of all, Deshaun Watson has to get back on track. Last year, in his 6 starts after he was suspended, Deshaun Watson played poorly. Yards per attempt was bad. Total touchdown passes were bad. Everything was bad. Do I think Deshaun Watson forgot how to play football? No, of course not. I don't think that's the case. Do I also note that there were other quarterbacks who had similar or lesser runways in terms of preparation time who played really well? Yeah. Like I hear all the time, well, Deshaun, he came off suspension. Was he rusty? Brock Purdy came off of being the last pick in the draft and got probably 0 reps with the ones prior to taking over when Jimmy G got hurt. Like, I don't want to hear that Deshaun Watson only had a month of practice with his teammates before he got back on the field. There was some nasty weather in a couple of those games. I do believe, though, that Deshaun Watson will be a much closer to who he was type of player, and that helps. Second of all, though, we know Amari Cooper, he's bound to see a legitimate work share. It was a little bit up and down last year with Amari Cooper because it's always a little bit up and down with Amari Cooper, but I expect him to be the Browns receiver that has the chance for a top 10 wide receiver season. David Njoku really blossomed last year, and as things stand right now, I think has a chance to be kind of where he was last season. But then I think the Elijah Moore conversation comes into play. What we don't know about Elijah Moore, though, is how much touchdown upside will he have, because he's a diminutive slot receiver, right? He is a very, very good slot receiver, or can be. But like, I don't think there's a 10 or 12 touchdown season upside for him every single year. Maybe once in his career. I don't think it's consistent, though.
Yeah, and I think that's fair with Elijah Moore. If he fits into that slot role, there isn't going to be a whole lot of touchdown upside for him. Now, what do you think this does for Donovan Peoples-Jones' value in fantasy? Do you think is he more like, is this a bench stash guy that you hope maybe pops off a couple of times?
I think so. And Peoples-Jones, one of those guys last year who like had such bad touchdown luck. I think he is perfectly suited as a number 3 receiver on an NFL team. And the Browns have, like, obviously they have Amari Cooper, who's very, very good. But like, every player beyond that, at the wide receiver room, including Elijah Moore right now, does have some question marks surrounding them, because while it's easy for us to say like Elijah Moore is going to be a bona fide star, the Jets are morons, like the Jets also really could have used Elijah Moore or a player like that last season, and he wasn't getting that much run. Like, is there something we don't know? We'll find out, but I'm bullish on Elijah Moore more so than DPJ, and I think DPJ's strengths have been, traditionally stretching the field. He's a big physical wide receiver, at least can be, and he has a much different stature than somebody like Elijah Moore. So I think he's just a bench stash. Like, if this offense absolutely lights the world on fire because they have a quarterback who in prior years has led the NFL in passing yards, then I get it. You could have a third receiver. It does have some level of fantasy value week in and week out. But I think for the most part, DPJ is just a bench stash.
It makes me sad, but you're 100% right. Those stretch the field guys in those kind of offenses tend to be so touchdown dependent.
Yeah.
And we didn't see a lot of that from him last season. Don't know if we're going to see a lot of it from him this season. Now, we've got a question in the chat here, and since you're the man plugged in, OBJ linked to Pittsburgh. Have you heard that rumor at all? I have not heard it.
I don't think it was a rumor. I think it was a fit that Dan Orlovsky, my colleague at ESPN, liked, which was, hey, if you were to put OBJ somewhere, where would it be? He thought Pittsburgh would be a good fit. I'd be surprised. I think for now, and again, things can change, but for now, our eyes are kind of on just one team with OBJ. It's the New York Jets. Of course, Aaron Rodgers has made it clear, he admitted to Pat McAfee, who wouldn't want to play with somebody like Odell Beckham Jr. So my guess is that OBJ's most likely landing spot is the New York Jets.
So that presents an interesting situation in New York, because you've got Allen Lazard, who just signed the 4-year, $44 million contract. You've got the stud second-year wide receiver Garrett Wilson. So then you bring in OBJ. Obviously, Corey Davis is out. But
seems like it, yeah.
What does that look like in this wide receiver room for fantasy? Because that's a loaded wide receiver room.
It's busy, that's for sure. Here's what I would say. Garrett Wilson. That's my answer. It's like, I trust Garrett Wilson, right? Because while Lazard's a nice piece, and he's a friend of Aaron Rodgers, obviously a very close one, there's a reason. Like, last year, we wanted to make Allen Lazard a thing, and as the number 1 wide receiver in the Packers offense, he was fine, right? I mean, and obviously it became Christian Watson down the stretch, right? But like, think of it that way, is that no matter how much Aaron Rodgers likes Allen Lazard, Garrett Wilson is the Christian Watson, right, in this offense, is that like, it doesn't matter how close I am with you. We got to win games, and throwing the football to in New York 17, but in Green Bay it was number 9. That's how we can actually unlock this offense. So Garrett Wilson is like a top 15 wide receiver as things presently stand right now. I think Lazard will have some value. OBJ, if he's signed, all right, I'm trying not to, like, I don't want to be a contrarian for contrarian's sake. I want to simply see a little bit of OBJ, because as of right now, we haven't seen him play a football game, and it's March 23rd in 13 months. Yeah. We have no idea. The workouts looked great, obviously, and he can make ridiculous catches. His hands are not going to ever retire, right? He'll be 65 making circus catches. But I just want to know what it looks like for OBJ on the field. We saw last year, and this is very important to note, we saw several guys coming off of major injuries that just weren't the same physically at any point during the season. Robert Woods. Now, Woods is a more veteran player who's older, but he was not the same level of explosive coming off that torn ACL. Chris Godwin, he ended up playing and having a really, really good season. But remember, he got hurt right away after he came back in week 1. And his yards per catch cratered last season. The reality for Godwin is that might be just as much about the offense in Tampa last year as anything else. That being said, maybe it was because he wasn't the same level of explosive. You go to the running back spot. We did not see it from James Robinson, right? He had the Achilles tear. He looked good for like 3 weeks and then nosedive. We have seen, though, that second year after a major injury is where a guy reverts to form, which is why, I think it'll be a little bit better for Robert Woods this year. I think that James Robinson, if he plays, will be a little bit better. I'm sure he'll play, but how much he plays for the Patriots, It'll look more like the Jacksonville version than it did the New York Jets version. So, long-winded way of saying with OBJ, I need to see it. Like, is there a top 20 wide receiver season in him? There could be, but when was the last time? Seriously, last time that OBJ was a consistent top 20 play for a full season? Has it been 5 years?
Yeah, it's been 5. I mean, he never put it together in Cleveland.
So 2.5 years in Cleveland, never put it together, right? Half a season with the Rams. He got hotter in the playoffs, right? Obviously. Then he's out for the whole year last year. He didn't play. So I'm talking about like 4 or 5 years, so of course I will be taking flyers on OBJ. There's no two ways about that. But to sit here and me tell you, like, all right, OBJ, number 1 wide receiver for the Jets, top 15 play. That to me is too strong of a characterization right now.
Well, and you make a good point about the injuries. And yeah, it's been 13 months since we saw the guy on the field. There's going to be some rust when he comes back because practice isn't game speed. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in New York. This is probably one of the most curious situations for me in fantasy as far as wide receivers go. So that's really good insight, Field. Appreciate that. I've got one quick question here before we pop into the Podfather for a quick little ad break.
All right.
This is from my friend Shane. Do you listen to other fantasy podcasts or shows to compare and improve your process? And if so, which ones do you like to listen to?
So I like to have, as much as I can, unvarnished thoughts when I'm on the microphone, right? I don't want to go there and just repeat something I heard from other podcasts. But do I also have every once in a while check out some other shows? Of course I do. Excuse me. There are a handful of shows, and these are some of many, right? But I absolutely love the work that Josh Norris and Hayden Winks do together under Underdog Fantasy. Danny and Danny from The Ringer, the Ringer Fantasy Football Show, Heifetz and Kelly. The entire Establish the Run team is tremendous. Fantasy footballers are absolute legends. Like, there's some really, really great content out there that I check out from time to time. But I try to, at least like coming off of a Sunday, especially, like I try to go into our show with my take as mine, not my take that's been influenced because I heard somebody else say it. And, let me repeat what they said, or let me be influenced by what they said and have my take be manipulated a little bit.
I see. I love to hear you say that because I'm the same way. I really don't consume a lot of content outside of, I read a lot of NFL content, watch some NFL podcasts, listen to some NFL podcasts, but I want it to be me. I don't want it to be a Field Yates take. I don't want it to be a Matthew Berry take. I want it to be a Nate Polvogt take. And if you're always going to have some crossover with those takes, of course. But I think that's a really good way to look at it, Field. I love that answer. Just real quick here, we're going to hear from the Podfather folks.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free, and one of our key missions is to make as much statistics and information and deep analysis available on PlayerProfiler.com for free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In package to continue to make all this possible. If you can't do All In, that's okay. We have a draft kit. Or you can just subscribe to the player rankings. Those now include Tight End Premium FFPC ranks. Our brand new data analysis package will blow your hair back. And of course, there's our Dynasty Deluxe and our DFS Dominator. Take a moment, check out our premium services to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.
Thanks for that, Matt. Guys, if you're going to sign up for the All-In package, definitely do it. They're fantastic tools. Use the promo code NATE, and you will get $10 off for the year. Now, Field, we've got a question in the chat here from Seth Dywald. Does DJ Moore have wide receiver 1 upside this year in Chicago?
Let me be clear again. I'm going to be careful in saying that every player has wide receiver 1 upside, but I do think he's like, I think of it more as strong wide receiver 2 upside than wide receiver 1 upside. And here's the reason why. Excuse me, I've been fighting something recently. DJ Moore touchdowns have never been a big thing. Right? If you go back, I'm going to pull it up right now. And I want to say it was like back-to-back years of exactly 4 touchdowns. Let me correct myself in case that is wrong. But I'm looking it up right now. And if you go back-to-back seasons, 2019, 2020, 2021, 4. He beefed it up to 7 last year. If you think about how you get to a top 10 fantasy receiver season, it's really one of 2 ways: astronomical volume or astronomical touchdown upside. I think the volume will be solid, but we've just got some guys who are absolute vacuums right now, right?
Yep.
Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, right? Like, just sort of go through and ask yourself, all right, CeeDee Lamb, am I taking, like, is it possible? Yes. But assuming those guys stay healthy, who has the much clearer path to a top 10 fantasy season? And my estimation would be that it's some players like that as opposed to a guy in DJ Moore, who I think will score more touchdowns for sure, but I'm not totally convinced is like a top 10 to 12, a 10 to 12 per season type wide receiver year in and year out.
See, and that's, if you look at 2021 specifically, he had 3 touchdowns in his first 4 games, and then he was nothing for the rest of the season. And while Darnold kind of fizzled and they had a lot of situation in Carolina, I think you're right here. And the concern I have for DJ Moore, honestly, right now is the volume. Is the volume going to be there in Chicago? Because you've got Chase Claypool, you've got Darnell Mooney, they just got Robert Tonyan, they've still got Cole Kmet. That's a lot of mouths to feed. And I hate that narrative, too many mouths to feed. But in this situation, you've got 3 receivers that all have the wide receiver 2 potential. Now, Claypool's probably more debatable in that avenue. Mooney's maybe a little bit more questionable as well, but is the volume going to be there for more? Can Fields throw the ball that much effectively to get him into a wide receiver, even 2 category?
That's a good question. And by the way, like, we don't know what the offense will look like this year, because it's hard to say that, oh yeah, like they ran it so much last season and Justin Fields had over 1,000 rushing yards last season. That's kind of what they want to play offense like. No, part of how you play offense is what you have available to you. So last season, the Bears had an offense that was geared around a quarterback who has, you know, if he's not the best rushing quarterback in the NFL, he's not that far behind Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar probably is still, he is the king of running amongst quarterbacks, but Justin Fields is in that very next tier of guys who have, I mean, the kind of upside he has, which is he's one of 3 quarterbacks ever with 1,000 rushing yards in a single season. But also you had a very limited wide receiver room, especially once Darnell Mooney got hurt, and a Chase Claypool acquisition was much more playing the long game than it was expecting him to arrive from Pittsburgh and all of a sudden turn that offense upside down. Now you have a full offseason with Chase Claypool, a healthy Darnell Mooney, a full offseason with DJ Moore, some pieces added in the draft potentially. So I think this Bears offense will look much more like I think they'll be, Justin Fields will be a big time distributor this year. And I think that the rushing upside might go down a little bit, but it'll be offset by the passing upside, because if you go back and look at him last year, really wasn't that much he did as a passer that stood out in the world of fantasy football.
Fantastic. I love that answer. Now, Phil, I'm going to bring this one up. This is a question that has divided the Player Profiler staff.
Ooh.
Rachaad White in 2023, yay or nay?
Yay, but very important thing here. What does this backfield look like in a month? Or I guess probably 5 weeks, right? As of right now, Rachaad White is the guy. Chase Edmonds recently added in free agency on a 1-year deal, but I think Edmonds kind of is what he is, right? He is a change of pace type back. Was probably overmatched as a number 1 back, which is kind of the money Miami signed him for last offseason. But the fact that he's played for Miami, Denver, and now obviously Tampa Bay in the span of, I guess, about 1 year tells you kind of like he's not the guy. There has been, many have, and it's not, I don't think it's reporting. I think it's more just speculation. People have wondered, would Zeke Elliott be a good fit there in Tampa? And the reality is that if you sign Zeke Elliott, for some of the things that Zeke no longer does well, one thing he does extremely well is get tough yards between the tackles, especially at the goal line. If you sign Zeke Elliott, the touchdown upside goes way down. But what we did see last year from Rachaad White is a very obvious skill set that is extremely impressive. One thing I will keep an eye on, though, for Tampa this year that I think impacts whoever they have in the backfield is that they had astronomical production in the passing game out of those 2 backs. Now, Some of that might have been because of the offensive line play. Maybe a lot of it was because of the offensive line play, which was downright dreadful last year, one of the worst in the NFL. They had to throw the ball fast. You also had a quarterback who was not mobile, who was prone to throw the ball fast. He's the greatest ever, by the way, in Tom Brady. But you go back and watch that offense, and it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts if they were going to score a touchdown. It was never going to be 3 plays, 65 yards, 6 points. Like, that wasn't how they were going to win last year. So, excuse me once again. That's how I think they're going to win. That's how I think they were. That's how they had to win last year. I'm not sure that's how they win this year, which means that the games where he's consistently getting 10 targets or even 8 targets, 7 targets may not be there. But still a yay.
And that's a good point, because we simply don't know what this offense is going to be. And if it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask at quarterback, I think that does kind of limit what he can do. We've got one more, and this is a question I wanted to ask you anyway. Is Roschon Johnson worth a first-round pick in a single quarterback dynasty rookie draft?
Ooh. Man, I don't know. We're talking rookie drafts already? We got to see where these guys get drafted, right?
Right. That's fair. A lot of industry people I've noticed like to do their rookie drafts before the draft. They think it gives them some sort of edge, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If you had to guess right now,
the guy who's not the guy, like, it's amazing that at Texas they can have backups who are going to get drafted in the first round, right? Like, that to me is crazy. So I think the reality for rookie drafts is that if you're doing it right now, more power to you. But at this juncture, other than, like, there are a few guys. Bijan Robinson, no question, first round pick. There's no two ways about it. I'm trying to think of anybody else. He's the only player that I can tell you unequivocally will have first round value. Maybe throw a couple quarterbacks in there, especially if it's super flex league. But Bijan Robinson is the one guy that sticks out more than others. Like, I really happen to really like Zay Flowers and Jackson Smith and Jigba. But so much of that is dependent upon where they land, right? I mean, if the Giants draft Jackson Smith and Jigba with their need right now at wide receiver, you and I would both argue that's one of the best landing spots for any rookie. But if, and I'm just, again, extrapolating this out, if the Ravens draft Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then Lamar Jackson and the Ravens contract dispute lingers into the season, he's not there for part of the year, he goes Le'Veon Bell style. Remember that a handful of years ago where he didn't play during that franchise tag year? I think Lamar will play, to be clear, but I'm just saying, like, I'm just giving you the sort of the worst case scenario for a rookie first round pick amongst wide receivers. If it's Tyler Huntley's his quarterback and an offense that wants to run the ball, his value is way different, right? Yeah. You flip those those scenarios. So I think that Roschon Johnson, super talented guy. It's amazing that, again, he was the backup at Texas and still is going to be drafted fairly high. But if he goes in the third round and he goes to if the Eagles take him in the third round, he could be the guy. He could also be behind Rashad Penny and Boston Scott, and Kenny Gainwell is going to get his usual work in the passing game. So it's hard to say for certain that a guy who isn't going in the first round of the real draft should go in the first round of a rookie dynasty draft.
So, Phil, what I'm hearing here is, guys, stop doing your rookie drafts before the NFL draft. It doesn't make sense. That's what I'm hearing here. So now,
here's what I would say is it does make sense in this regard, is that, like, it makes sense because we're passionate and we love this stuff. That's why it makes sense. Do it whenever you want to do it. That's when you should do it. That being said, if you are somebody like me who prefers to have as much context as possible, then wait. I think rookie drafts are best suited at least until after the NFL draft. And that's why, all things being equal, if I can do drafts in the month of August specifically, but like the last week of August, I'm in. Give me that. If you can't, and it's really hard to get people together, it's really hard to get people on the same schedule, especially in the summer. If, you got kids, whatever it is, like people are in camp, traveling, yada, yada, yada. There are a lot of reasons why drafts are hard to organize. If you can do them, though, in late August or early September, it helps you the most. It gives you the best picture of where things are actually going to be when the season begins.
Well, that's so many things can happen between now and then. And speaking of things happening between now and then, are there any like veteran wide receivers that you could see possibly not on managers' radars that could be fantasy relevant in 2023?
When you said the note, I was thinking about this and, veteran receivers. I think that, and we talked about it a bit earlier, but like it's DJ Moore in Chicago. There's no two ways about it. But if Chase Claypool becomes the player I think Chicago envisioned when they traded for him, that's useful, right? Especially because as a rookie, he had like 10 touchdowns on a 5-game stretch. He was incredible for that middle of the season stretch in Pittsburgh. He's an example of a guy. And then I think you have to go to teams that, as of right now, don't necessarily have a lot in the wide receiver cabinet. And how can that player step into either a larger role or look at teams who their wide receiver room seems subject to change, right? Is Tim Patrick going to be the last man standing amongst the 3 Broncos wide receivers amidst trade rumors right now surrounding both Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy?
Ooh.
Even if only one of them is traded, Tim Patrick as a number 2 wideout in an offense is fairly useful. Those are the kind of things. Then you go to places that are like so barren. Excuse me. And like, I think they'll do something about this. And they do have 2 tight ends now. But like Matt Collins is number 2 receiver in Atlanta. That's a deep cut right there, right? But Matt Collins, who had a good year last year for the Raiders, by the way, is the number 2 wideout in Atlanta in an offense that you hope is more pass heavy. Now, they could easily draft a wide receiver early, and that would nuke everything I just said. But you ask for a player that's off fantasy managers' radars, I don't think Matt Collins is on too many people's radars right now.
No, and that's a really good pull because, like you said, he did play well in Las Vegas last season. I think that got kind of lost in how bad Las Vegas was with Derek Carr and that just mess of an offense. But I like that. Matt Collins is a good deep pull. So I'm going to ask you this for me. I'm a big Laviska Shenault fan. Is there any hope for him in Carolina?
Tell you what, they speak about him like a player that can really do something for you. That being said, what we have to figure out with Laviska Shenault is he a player that can consistently become like a weapon in the passing game, or is he a guy that's going to be best sort of as like a wild card in the passing game and occasionally in the running game? I'll use an example, and I know that he would take people to task on this, but the Chiefs got a good amount out of Mecole Hardman, but a lot of it was like design jet sweep stuff at or near line of scrimmage. Think of Rondale Moore as well in Arizona up to this point. What does it look like? Like that could be Laviska Shenault's destiny, is kind of utilizing his strength as a runner. He's so good in the open field, or can be so good in the open field. He's got this dynamic skill set, but got to be more consistent. And right now in Carolina, they don't have a lot. Obviously, they've added Hayden Hurst, and they've added Adam Thielen, and they've added most recently Miles Sanders, who will impact the passing game a little bit. But if they stock him wide out in whatever picks they don't use on their first overall quarterback, then all of a sudden the picture for Laviska Shenault looks a bit different.
Well, on that note, Field, you made me a little bit sad, but it's fair. I want to thank you so much for coming on with me, man. I know you've got a busy day, so we're going to get you out of here. Guys, make sure you're following Field Yates on Twitter. This just seems like a no-brainer. If you want good news sources, you want breaking news quickly and good advice, make sure you're following him. Field, again, thank you so much for coming on with me, my friend, and we will see you all next week.
All right.